Hello and welcome to this video where I shall try to break down this animation which I made using Procreate 5 and Procreate Dreams. So, without further ado, let's just get straight to it. I started out with the artwork at first on Procreate 5. How lively or scenic your animation will look depends to a great extent on the amount of details you put into the painting, so take your time and go all out in this step. This, as you can see, was the initial sketch, and well, let's just go through a quick time lapse of the painting. You need to make sure that all the objects are in their distinctive proper layers, depending on how far they are from the foreground or the background, and just name these layers so that there is no confusion while animating. The last two layers are for the lighting, and as you can see, I have used the add blending mode for each of these. And like in Procreate 5, you can adjust the opacity of these layers seamlessly in Procreate Dreams. So now let me open another canvas where we can see the window which is moving in the sequence, and let's briefly go over the layers involved. You can see that there are 5 layers in the group, starting with the window glass at a low opacity. Then I have this layer called the haze, which is clipped onto the window glass. Then we have the condensation base on overlay blending mode with low opacity and the condensation highlight layer. Finally, we have the frame of the window. One of the key steps to keep in mind when animating the window is that the haze layer, which is basically the blurred vision of the background through the window frame, stays still. So you're gonna have to select all the other layers in the group while animating this movement, which we shall do in Procreate Dreams. Now I shall open one more canvas where we can see the lighting effect on the window which is to be animated. Once again, we shall be playing around with the opacity while animating the scene using Dreams, using its tweening feature. So now that we have the scene for our animation set up, let's move on to the frame by frame animation, starting with this little bird. Initially, as you can see, I have these very crude frames at a very low FPS. So here all I'm trying to do is get the movement right, and it does not have to be super smooth. Just make sure you have the keyframes in, and we shall add the in-betweens while cleaning up. Next, we have the line art of these keyframes, still at a low FPS, and let me just play it through. So as you can see, I have added these tiny squiggles here and there just to make the movement more expressive. After this, I proceeded with the coloring, and firstly went over with the base colors, thereafter used different blending modes and just to do the shades properly, and this is how the animation looks like after the coloring is done. So the final animation here is in 24 frames per second, and you can play around with the whole duration so as to ensure the animation looks as smooth and appealing as you want it to. Alright, so now with that covered, we shall move on to Procreate Dreams. There are already videos around which walk you through the workspace and all of the tools available on Dreams, hence I shall skip all of that. In case you don't know, you can import your file from Procreate 5 to Dreams simply by having both the windows open and dragging the file over. Once imported, convert the image frames into track. You can do this by pressing on the imported frames, and you find the option to convert to track. So here we have our timeline and then these two groups. As the animation plays over, what you can see below the track are the keyframes which define the camera movement to some extent. Now to break down this animation, we basically have two sequences. In the first one, we have the camera moving downwards as the window is open. I try to make the scene as natural as possible with the light flooding in when the window is opened at first, and then the intensity of the light fades out as the eyes adjust to it. In the other sequence, we have the bird hopping in, and as it flies away, the camera zooms in on the background. We have the sunbeams and the bouquet lights dancing around here and there, and the focus of the camera shifts from the objects in the foreground, which blur out, while the trees in the distance appear sharper. So if we expand on the groups, we can see all the different layers which we already went through in Procreate. Now going back to the keyframes for the camera movement, first we work on the whole group and then add the effect separately on each layer so as to bring about the illusion of dynamic three-dimensional movement. Here for the first sequence, we are simply moving the camera downwards. Hence, all we need to do is that we select the move and scale from the action pop-up and put in the appropriate values for translation along the y-axis. If you press on the little track which appears in between the keyframes, you will find an option to set easings, and I have set it to linear here. And similarly for the other sequence, I have set 3 such keyframes, 2 at the extremes and 1 at the former half of the sequence to achieve the exact motion I want. The easing here has been set to ease in and ease out. Okay, now we shall go over how I did the window movement. As you can recall, we primarily had 5 layers, and this rotational motion was achieved by scaling 4 of those. In a similar manner to the window frame, as we shall see. So you can set the anchor by clicking on these 3 dots and move it to the appropriate pivot position and scale it around the axis the way you want. Once you have done that, you can go about and put in translation, rotation and scale values for the remaining tracks. So that's basically what I did here. I just went over the other tracks and I put in the same values for the translations and stuff I had for the window frame in the remaining tracks. However, if you simply do this, it won't be enough to achieve the 3D effect. After a certain angle, the window will seem flat and it will just look more like a distortion of the window rather than it revolving. So what I did here was that I painted over these frames so as to give it the illusion of depth and shadow. This here is the handle, as you can see, which was drawn frame by frame on a separate track. And then there are these, there's the window frame over there, and yeah, we have the inner edges of the window which were also painted on an added track. I can group these together by clicking on the timeline editor, encircling the frames using my Apple Pencil and finally grouping them together. So now I'll just toggle the visibility of this group here and I'll just go over and do the same with the handle of the window. Once again I'll group this and yeah, so I hide this track. And now you can see how flat this window appears. Okay, so now I'll just toggle the visibility back for this layer and yeah, I'll just ungroup it again so that I can draw on it. Yeah, just a second. Yeah, so basically you can see the inner edges of the window drawn here and they will appear thicker as the window opens at a larger angle. There we go. So this had to be drawn out frame by frame. And similarly, let's just go over the window handle once again. There we have it. Yeah, so with that we just put it together to get the entire fluid movement. There. Now at this point I went back to Procreate 5 to do the hand movement. Here you can see the rough drawings. And this is once again followed by the clean line art. finally we have the colored frames, which I then simply put back into Procreate Dreams. And yep, that completes that little sequence. Now for the next bit. We already saw the move and scale keyframes for this entire group, but for the sake of clarity, let's just go over it once again. So we have these 3 keyframes, and for your animation you can place them in positions as suited for the motion. And after this we just go over each of these layers in the group and scale them up in different proportions depending on how far away they are from the camera. The window frame, for instance, is closest to us and thus gets scaled up the most as we zoom in. And it also gets out of focus as the camera lens gets closer, so I applied the Gaussian blur effect appropriately. Initially there's no blur, and so there you can see. You can change the amount as you want. For me, this just seemed the most appropriate. And we do the same thing for the little plants outside the window, only that they get scaled up a little lesser than the window. I also added some warped movements for the plants, just to give a slight movement in the gentle breeze. Similarly, just go over the frames with the distant objects, scaling them up a little less each time, and also in this case they go from being out of focus to in focus, hence you set the blur value higher at the start of the sequence and 0 towards the end. As for the lighting, in addition to the movement, I have adjusted the opacity and blur at a couple of places for both the sun rays and the bokeh lights. And the bokeh is made to follow the light rays with a slight lag, just for the effects. And lastly, we have the snowfall. For this, I simply painted out a rather long canvas with flakes on 3 different layers. One with larger flakes for the snowfall closest to us, one slightly smaller for the mid-ground, and the last consisting of tiny flakes falling in the distance. And all I have to do after bringing the frames over in Procreate Dreams within each group is to set the keyframes to add a bit of translation, mostly along the y-axis, and set in the easing to linear. And that is basically it. Putting everything together, we have this final animation which you guys loved so much. So that's it with my little walkthrough. I hope it helps. Thanks for watching and have a great day, and of course stay tuned to see my animation as I progress with the same. Make sure to subscribe so you do not miss out on my works, and let me know in the comments if you like this tutorial and want me to make more of these. So long folks, bye.